Well, I would say, well, and that's a statutory change. You might also revisit who sits on the Air Resources Board. Over time, it has come to have 6 experts and 5 local air district representatives, and the air districts made sense at the time when air pollution was 50-50 mobile stationary. That's not the case anymore. It's almost all mobile these days. And with the advent of AB 32, you need people with other expertise on the board who aren't there now. So perhaps more technical experts and fewer local government representatives on the board. With respect to what the legislature can do going forward, it is to ask the Air Resources Board and Cali to explain to you what the hard public policy choices are going forward. Become familiar with the math of how you get 174 million metric tons of greenhouse gas reduction, because the math reveals the consequences. For example, the math in the 2006 Climate Action Plan calls for 27-odd million metric tons from reforestation. That equates to 9 million acres of new forests or more intensive use of the forests we have. Well, how is that going to happen? You know, how is that going to happen? Who's paying to acquire land? Who's changing laws to require more planting on the forests that there are? Who's working with Congress and the U.S. Forest Service about how federal lands are managed? How are we calculating the effect of raging forest fires against our new planting? And if we have cap and trade, will we use that mechanism to draw financial contributions from oil refiners, electric utilities, cement manufacturers, and use them for planting trees? Those are the major issues going forward. There was a similar assumption made, and these are things, ARB is starting from that plan and saying, well, okay, that's what we could do, what will we do? There's an assumption made that we'll have smart roads and more compact landforms, and there'll be less vehicle travel. Well, how's that going to happen? It's not happening now. Vehicle miles traveled are increasing, and there's a lot of very good policies, there's a lot of terrific initiatives from this administration and prior administration, but what's happening on the ground? And how do we facilitate those actions on the ground so vehicle travel does in fact decrease? And the legislature starts watching for those things. The implementation mechanisms will take care of themselves. The financing questions will come to the fore, and you can decide if it will be bonded, if there will be fees, if it will be paid for by polluters, and you can sort of give the signals the Air Resources Board needs about, you know, where are the limits of political tolerance in this state for how to achieve our common objectives.
And it seems to me what you're getting at in some of your testimony is administration's perceived limits of political tolerance just in their arena, and your view of what the appropriate steps are as an independent board and to do it on a science basis. And going forward, how do you advise us to try to be able to back up the independence and the science when faced with that?
Well, the term appointments is the number one thing you can do, because then the board is stable and they can do their work. But the hard decisions are about social equity and public investment. And just keep asking about the math. Where are the tons coming from? And become familiar with the wedge analyses that have been done by Dr. Sokolow and others about how as a nation you come up with gigatons of CO2, and then we're trying to do that analysis, ARB is trying to do that analysis for California. What are the options to add it all up and say yay or nay?
Senator Miller, I just wanted to clarify, you thought that I said that we should discuss the pros and cons of whether we should do something about global warming. I did not say that. What I said is we should discuss the pros and cons of what tools we use to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and I think Catherine actually just made that point, that the fundamental underlying issue here is the tension between the legislature and the executive branch about what tools we should use. Now, the governor's accused of saying that he wants a market as if that's all he wants. The truth is, and we've said this as many times as we can, we recognize that there needs to be a myriad of tools that are used, including market-based mechanisms. Catherine just talked about all the different challenges that we have to think about. I think that that should be the debate today. We should talk about the types of tools we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, let me just say for the record that I disagree with that characterization, because what's really happening is whether or not the careful negotiations and the balance on the bill are allowed to be changed after the fact. And there was a careful balance to go regulatory and to study the entire menu of market rate things, as opposed to decide one was important, move it to the front of the process, out of the timeline, and that's what was negotiated in the bill.
But I don't.
So let me follow up. I had a question for the Deputy Secretary, my last question, so we can move on, and that is you mentioned, and I think many of us are pleased with Mary Nichols' appointment, and you referred to her as thoughtful and considerate. Will she be given the independence to deal with science-based things in a way that is a